I want to move on now to opening statements Wednesday in the largest fraud case in Jacksonville history. The executives, Ryan Wanamaker and Aaron Zahn, are accused of masterminding a plot to privatize JEA and then skim profits through a benefit plan that they hatched. David, I was there with you in court for
Yeah.
those opening statements, and you got a tough month ahead.
Yeah, they're talking about several weeks of testimony. I think there were the prosecution talking about 30 witnesses they're going to call, and it's a white collar crime case. So the jurors are really seeing lots of memos, lots of videos. It's a real methodical case. I was thinking that if you just walked in off the street into that courthouse, you might what's the fuss about? Is this the biggest scandal that rocked Jacksonville in recent years? But it's going to be that one of those cases where they're really going to build a methodical case, and all along the defense attorneys for Aaron Zahn and Ryan Wanamaker are going to try and poke holes in the testimony and the witnesses. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how these jurors come down, because I think both sides can put a narrative out there for the jurors to hang a hat on in terms of whether they come back with a guilty or acquittal.
And I thought it was interesting as we're watching the arguments for both. So there's two juries, there's two defendants. They're telling very different stories about what happened, David. It's not, they will ask one jury to leave the room and present their side, which often really contradicts what the other attorney has said happened.
Right. Well, yeah, I think there are cases where Aaron Zahn, the former CEO, and Ryan Wanamaker, the former chief financial officer, are not on the same page in terms of what the best strategy is for them to convince the jury. And each has his own jury that he has to convince, because they're going to hear the testimony together, both jurors. Then they're going to go separately in the jury room where they'll deliberate on what they've heard. So that's a really interesting dynamic that's going on there in terms of how they'll handle, say, cross-examination, call their own witnesses. And there may be some times where one jury will leave and the other jury will stay during some portions of the trial, not a lot of it. But yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic and how that's going to play out when they come to decision time.
Tricia.
Yeah, the jury switching thing is bizarre, and I think it contributes to the really difficult job that media have in this case, which is, A, trying to explain to their readers and watchers this really complicated case and trying to make them care about what appears to be just another case of corporate greed. And even though it's a city-owned utility, it just has that stench about it, more rich people making more millions of dollars. And so I think I'm interested in what the feedback that you all have gotten with your coverage of this, because I find it to be a really difficult case to explain the nuances of.
I mean, it's a problem that prosecutors are also having. I will say, having watched that opening statement from Tyson Duva, the lead prosecutor in the case, it's a lot. There's so many lawyers. There's so many players. There's so many spreadsheets that they have to look at. There's so many firms that were involved. One of the defense attorneys even kind of did like these are the people, and put up the pictures of everybody. These are the people you're going to be, hearing about. Here's Melissa Dykes. Here's, Jay Stowe. So trying to introduce this massive cast of characters, Keitha, how are you handling it?
It is a lot, but I've got to tell you, so Jeannie Blaylock has been our main anchor for First Coast News. She has been out there in the courtroom as well, covering this in the evening, along with Renata Gregorio. And I like the fact that we are getting to the crux, the heart of this, to me, the people affected. Because you think about it, what was on the table, 30% of the workforce for JEA possibly losing their jobs. So to me, I'm thinking, well, what were these people going through? Imagine walking into your job day in and day out, like, am I going to have a job, a paycheck, to what I need to feed my family? And that's really what it was all about, because this alleged greed from these people trying to get millions of dollars, and people are just trying to collect their paychecks, wondering, is this going to happen? Is JEA going to be sold? Am I going to be able to support my family? So to me, that's the heart of this, is who was going to be affected and how exactly. And that's what we've been seeing a lot of our coverage kind of like geared towards, who's affected by this mainly. And it's about the people, in my opinion.
And the case has been, has included some of that. David, the lead prosecutor, has, kind of started off his presentation talking about, when the first street light was installed and by JEA, and kind of this long history, and then describing Aaron Zahn as just sort of parachuting in, taking this great company, this great utility, and all of its wealth, and then trying to appropriate it.
Right. I think that was really interesting how they kind of set this up in the context of this utility that goes back to the 19th century and was built by the hard work of linemen and executives, and they really did get to that people aspect in terms of the utility itself. And then this idea that you had this newcomer come in and decide to sort of say one thing in public while doing another thing in private, and basically try to capitalize on this wealth that others had built on behalf of the people of the city of Jacksonville. He made the comparison of somebody who starts a business in a garage and builds it from scratch and then goes out and sells it, compared to, say, coming in and somebody else has done all the hard work and just sort of finding a way, an angle to make yourself rich off it. And that's the case that they're going to make over and over again, I think, to this jury.
Yeah, I think he said that, you build your own company, that's your thing, but this wasn't Aaron Zahn's thing,
right?
To come in and to claim. So there's a lot of secrecy alleged in this, Trisha. These two men are accused of using password-protected thumb drives, encrypted messaging, erasable whiteboards, and then hand-delivering documents to avoid them being shared. It is nonetheless, it is a difficult case to build. There is nothing was ever taken. This plan, whatever it was, the sale and the planned, the benefit plan never was approved. And in fact, the city pulled the plug. JEA itself pulled the plug. So it's hard to tell a jury that a crime was committed. It's hard to prove.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you arrest somebody for trying to kill somebody, but the person never got killed, and so it's like, well, no harm done. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right, especially when it comes to just money. You're looking at this crime like, well, they got caught, nothing ever happened, he doesn't have a job anymore, let's just move along. And the secrecy doesn't help, and the complicated nature of this doesn't help at all. Like you were referring to all of the memos and the secrecy, the stories. I think going back to Keith's story, telling people exactly who was going to be affected and how is probably the key for the prosecutors. But also, I go back to the Jacksonville public. The key to getting Jacksonville residents to understand what the scope of what almost happened, I think, is pretty key. Not just for this particular case, but for them understanding the importance of them being aware of what's going on in their city and what could happen to their the public entities.
I've got to tell you, I'm paying so closely attention to this because I want to see exactly what's going to happen. I want the truth to finally come out. It feels like for years we've been hearing, speculation and assumptions. Let's see what really happened behind closed doors. So I just want to see the truth come out, hopefully.
A lot of people, Keith, are curious about, what role the former mayor played, or his minions. And, their names have come up in testimony, but the prosecutor, I think, rather deliberately is kind of steering the conversation away from getting too far into the weeds in terms of, anything that isn't material to this case. And so it may be that people with that curiosity won't be satisfied in terms of getting the answers about, what kind of pressures were applied, what the end game really was.
Or maybe they will. You don't know what's going to happen on that witness stand. We're talking about 30 plus witnesses. Was that the number that you had? Mm-hmm. I think we're going to find out a lot, and I'm waiting for it.
Some of it, does come out. I know that Paul McElroy testified. He was the former CEO who was eventually replaced by Aaron Zahn, and he made clear he was told, Aaron Zahn was being put in there to facilitate a sale of JEA. He was being put in by the mayor to effect a sale of JEA, and that was a pretty stark depiction of the whole scenario.
Right. Yeah, and we kind of had reported on it in broader terms, but it was really explicit. We'll find ways to make life hard for you if you don't step down. So it was definitely a forced ouster. I think in terms of some of the discussion about how to relate it to people, the prosecution's case is that this was a scheme to steal millions of dollars from you, the taxpayers of Jacksonville. That's the connection they're trying to make to this jury.
Or at least the ratepayers of.
If there was a sale, all this money should have gone to the city of Jacksonville. And these two executives were trying to steal, that's the word they use, money that taxpayers should have had. And it is a tough case to make because I think the prosecution's case will be, even if they never actually put this plan into effect, they hatched it, they advanced it, they operated in secrecy to move it forward. And that's all the jury needs to know to be able to return a conviction. And then the defense is going to argue over and over again, well, yeah, they explored a plan, but they scrapped it, they killed it. Aaron Zahn himself said, we're not going forward on it. How can you convict a guy who decided on his own not to move forward?
We've got a call. Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. I might be a bit confused, but I would just ask the city of Jacksonville if we've ever looked at a good crime story, if we've ever read a suspense novel, the prosecution can make the case. How many cases have we had of somebody? This is a conspiracy, and we've had conspiracies to commit murder. Nobody died, but they still got convicted for the conspiracy to attempt to commit murder. They were attempting to commit the murder of JEA and enrich themselves in the offing. In addition, my understanding is it was the city auditor. It wasn't like, oh, Aaron Zahn woke up one morning and decided to pull the plug. The city auditor saw this enrichment plan and yelled fire. Mm-hmm. It was a city employee that really turned this case. It wasn't because Aaron Zahn woke up one morning and thought, oh, let me do better than I'm doing. No, let's prosecute them for the attempted conspiracy to steal the money from JEA, and let's pull the former mayor into it because he facilitated. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Tricia, it is sort of a little bit of a revenge of the nerds story because it was, the CPAs that kind of came to the rescue, uncovered, this plan, this scheme to, perhaps take the profits from this sale and put it in the pockets of executives.
Yeah, it's kind of like what David was saying when Aaron Zahn, and what the caller said, he didn't just suddenly have a crisis of conscience. I mean, it was like the public workers looked at this plan and said, oh, are you kidding? And Aaron Zahn was like, yeah, actually, I'm kidding. We're not going to do this. So it totally was the revenge of the bean counters who looked at the plan and said, what? No, this is not going to work. And thank goodness for them.
But it really, really did come close to happening, Keitha, and I think that that's something worth remembering. I mean, this was a plan that had all the... And I thought it was interesting, too, because the attorneys for the defendants were saying, it had to go through all of these stages. It would have to go through the voters. It would need city council approval. It would need state approval. And listed on a piece of white paper all of these steps that would have had to, things that lights had to turn green before this could be accomplished. Mm-hmm. But the reality was many of those had already happened. And things like voter approval, that was going to be sweetened with maybe, as much as $2,000 per ratepayer in terms of rebates, benefits that they would get in the event of a sale. And so a public vote perhaps wasn't as high a wall to scale as it sounds.
Yeah. The bottom line is it got close, dangerously close, close to where it was scary for those who of us who sit back and think like, oh my gosh, that could have happened. But again, you have two sides to every tale, right? Because there are those who say this could have benefited Jacksonville, the money that we would have gained if it was sold, and those who say on the other side there are a lot of implications that could have been very dangerous to the city as well. So there are both sides to it. But I recently heard an interview with a councilman who said, so we know December of 2019, this was dead in the water, right? It wasn't going to happen. And the councilman said that was our Christmas present to Jacksonville. So this was interesting. Again, two sides to the coin, how some people felt like relieved that did not happen. And look at where we are now. Hopefully we'll find out exactly what did happen.